Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm Verit Kogan, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr. Shelley Carson. As a researcher and instructor at Harvard University, Dr. Carson has been a consultant and expert on the topics of psychopathology, creativity, and resilience since she received her doctorate from Harvard in 2001. She serves as Director of Education and Research of the Brain Health Initiative. She has also served as a subject matter expert for the Department of Defense and has been a scientific consultant for corporations, mental health groups, and individuals. Dr. Carson is the author of the award-winning book, Your Creative Brain: 7 Steps to Maximize Imagination, Productivity, and Innovation in Your Life. And she's the co-author of the critically acclaimed book, Almost Depressed. Her research has been widely published in both national and international scientific journals, and her work has been featured on the Discovery Channel, CNN, NPR, and BBC, as well as publications such as Newsweek and Scientific American. Dr. Carson writes the popular Psychology Today blog, Life is Art, and has won multiple teaching awards at Harvard, which is how I met her. I met Dr. Carson through a course that I took at Harvard, where she was my instructor. The course was called Psychological Resilience, and it was incredible. And Dr. Carson, it is such an honor to have you here with us today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, Verit. It's great to see you again.
Thank you. So I would personally love, and I would also love for my audience, for our listeners here, to hear a little bit about how you got into this line of work of resilience and specifically creativity.
Well, it's kind of an interesting story, I guess. When I was in my doctorate program, I became very interested in biographies of individuals, many of whom were highly creative. And what I always noticed was that so many of them had what we might call struggles with inner demons. So they were having mental health issues, and I was in a program where I was training to be a psychopathologist. And I really wondered, what is it about these creative people and mental illness? So I was interested in that connection. The more I studied it, the more I realized that many times highly creative people are engaged in creative work as a form of autotherapy or self-therapy, because it really can improve your mood. It can improve your mental health in general. And so that's how I became very interested in this interface between creativity, mental illness, and resilience. And here I am, still interested.
And if we were to rewind the clock even more, rewind the memory, the movie of your life even more, I think I recall hearing in our course that you were a flight attendant at some point.
Yes. Well, I consider my career as a flight attendant to be my first PhD in psychology, because when you run into people in airports and on airplanes, they are either at their best or their worst. And so it's really an exercise in learning about human behavior. So yes, so I was a flight attendant for many years, but I was always interested in psychology and learning more about how our incredible minds operate. And when I was still a flight attendant, I had young children and ended up actually stopping my work because of taking care of my young children. My husband was an airline pilot, so he was gone a lot too. And that gave me actually more time to consider psychology. And so I just blundered into applying to Harvard's PhD program. It was the only program I applied to. Ended up getting into it, and the rest is history. But I will say this, before I did that, I was taking a few courses at the Harvard Extension School, and I'm really blessed right now to be teaching the class that first got me interested in the field of psychology, the academic field of psychology. And so here I am teaching that very course that changed my life. So and I will also say this, Baird, I was not young when I did this. So I didn't get my PhD until the age of 50 something. And all I can say is you're never too old and it's never too late to follow your dreams.
Wow. Thank you for that. I think a lot of people needed to hear that and to be witness to somebody who followed her heart and went for it. So how about we start with what is creativity? And I ask that because I would love for our listeners today and viewers to walk away with the connection between creativity and resilience.
Okay,
How do
so
you
would I. I think that's a great idea. Well, I always say if you're going to study something scientifically, you have to be able to define it and you have to be able to measure it. So how do we define creativity? It's one of these really kind of nebulous constructs that has probably a million different definitions. I'm going to tell you a couple of my favorite ones and then I'll tell you what the scientific definition is. So one of my first is by Michael Page, who wrote a book called Visualization back in 1990. And he says creativity is the ability to bring into being or form out of nothing, to bring into being through force of imagination. Now, if you think about that, really everything you see around you, the desk you're sitting at, the computer that we are interfacing with each other with, the building you're in, the transportation that takes you everywhere you go, even the clothes you're wearing and the jewelry you're wearing was all just at one point a vision inside the brain of another human being, just like us, just like us. And everything around us, other than things of nature, were manifest through these visions. Everything was once just a vision in somebody's brain. So I think that's a wonderful definition of creativity. And a second one that I've always really liked was by Aaron Esman in a 1988 article that he wrote. And he says creativity is the attempt to mold a sense of order out of chaos. If you think about it, the goal of creativity or the goal of the creative individual, and we're all creative, is really the hero's journey. And that is to walk from the known world into chaos, which is out there outside the boundaries, and take information from there and combine it in some way that can become useful and bring that creation back to the known world. And that's the same as the hero's journey. If you look at all of mythology, the hero goes out into chaos, slays the dragon, brings part of that dragon back into the known world to enlarge that known world and make it a better place. So that's what creative people do when they're creating. May not be their intention to be doing that, but nevertheless, that is what happens. So let me talk a little bit now about the actual scientific definition of creativity. And if we want to be creative, most researchers agree that there are two components to that. The first is originality or novelty, duh. And the second one is usefulness or adaptability. And many people don't think about usefulness as being part of creativity, but usefulness in the broader sense of being adaptive in some way. So if we want to combine those two things, my definition is this. Creativity is the ability to take bits of information, whether those bits come from your internal store of knowledge and memories and skills, or from the outside environment, combine them and recombine them into novel, original, and adaptive ideas or products. So that's kind of the scientific definition of creativity. Now, a lot of people will come to me. I do a lot of creativity workshops and everything, and they come to me and they say, "Oh, I'm not creative. I can't even draw a stick figure." But what they're actually doing is they're conflating creativity with talent. So talent is technical ability in a particular domain or area that we might consider creative, but it's not the same as creativity. So talent is technical ability or skill, like maybe exhibiting perfect pitch, or having a real facility with numbers and mathematics. But creativity is the ability to combine and recombine elements into something novel and original and adaptive.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those definitions and kind of bringing that all together. And I have to say that when I heard that definition as part of one of the modules in our course, I remember it was like a light bulb went off, because I never thought of myself as particularly creative. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, I think I am, because, when I'm, doing trainings or in coaching, like I'll take different bits of tools and techniques and things that I've learned, and I'll kind of just, in the moment, just guided by intuition, I'll pull them together into something that is adaptive. In the moment, it's helpful to the person or people. And so it was like, wow, I guess I've been doing this all along, and I never, called myself creative. And I think that that's a limiting mindset, this whole, like, I'm not creative enough is a limiting mindset that a lot of people have. And sometimes it starts from early childhood, where maybe they were told, you're not very good at drawing or singing or piano or whatever. Or maybe they told themselves that. But I think that the way that you've opened up our minds, number one, to look at it through the lens of imagination, because we're creating things all day, every day. We're, everything from, an idea of what to have for dinner, even if we bought it, we're, it still came from our imagine. We're still creating something that we can use, in a way. And I said, do our work and everything else. So I want to know, if you don't mind, ask you then about the connection, even more so, between creativity and resilience. You talked a little bit about order from chaos. Tell us more.
Right. So I think you brought up some really interesting and very pertinent examples there. In your work, you're taking bits of knowledge from all different areas and you're bringing them together to solve a current problem. We call them creative problems, but it doesn't mean that a problem in the sense of I've got some horrible problem to solve. It means just solving or adding something new, right? So you are doing that all the time. Actually, whenever we have a conversation, like what you and I are doing right now, is creative, because what are we doing? We're taking bits of information, which are words, and we're putting them together in novel and original ways, unless we're using talking points, which we're not, that are in some way useful. And it is useful because we're imparting information to each other. And like you said, putting a meal together at night, or experimenting with a recipe. These are very creative acts. Every time you take an item and use it in a way that wasn't its original intention, like if you take a box and use it as a doorstop, that's a creative act. And so we do these everyday acts of creativity, probably a couple hundred times a day, and we don't even realize it, that we're being creative. And we don't want to confuse what we call big C creativity, which is like mind-bending, earth-shaking changes, like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony or Einstein's theory of relativity. And then there's everyday acts of creativity, which are the ones we do constantly. And we have these amazing tools inside our skull, our creative brains, that are just, all of us have these tools that allow us to be creative. And you mentioned a moment ago that maybe somebody told you when you were young that you weren't good at drawing, or you weren't, or you don't give up your day job to sing or something like that. And that's really unfortunate, because that creates a block to creative expression. And we want to break through those blocks, because we're all creative and we all have the ability to enhance our natural creativity. So let me get back to what was your question about resilience and creativity, right?
Yeah. So many people are struggling these days, Shelley, and there's overwhelm, there's a lot of stress, there's anxiety, and oftentimes they don't even, or at least they perceive that they don't even have time to do anything creative because they're just barely getting through with all the responsibilities and commitments that they have.
Yes, I agree. And really, creativity is the way that we are going to survive in this rapid change climate of the 21st century. You have to be flexible and adaptive and ready to change with the environment around you. If you're rigid and set in your ways, then you're not going to survive, whether you're talking about being an individual or being a business, being an organization, being a family, or even being the human race. Because if you think about it, our creativity is our human survival mechanism. Through the eons, we weren't fast enough to outrun predators or strong enough to fight off some of those big predators. The only way we survived was through our human ingenuity that allowed us to build tools and shelters and weapons, to keep ourselves safe in an environment that has always, in some ways, been hostile to us. So having a hostile environment, like through climate change, is nothing new. Humans have been dealing with issues of the environment since we've been around. So how can we deal with these things? How can we deal with the major issues that face us right now? And that could be climate, it could be political polarization, it could be the arrival of new viruses that are life-threatening. There's so many things that we can be anxious about right now, and we are anxious about, but the only way we're going to be able to deal with them is through creative solutions. So everybody needs to be honing those creative skills so that we can communally increase the volume of creativity that we need to deal with these major issues, as well as our everyday issues. Like, how do you deal with a client who is in difficulty? How do you deal with a child who didn't make the travel team, or feels like their feelings were hurt? All of these things take creativity.
Yeah.
And using our creativity is going to increase our ability to be resilient. There's a lot of research out there that talks about this. For instance, there's a lot of research that looks at creativity and stress reduction. We think about cortisol perhaps as being the stress hormone. We secrete cortisol, too much cortisol, when we're under stress, when the stress response has kicked in, that fight or flight response. And of course, we have natural daily fluctuations in cortisol, but we know that cortisol is associated with the stress response. And there have been a number of studies that have indicated that cortisol actually goes down with even something as short as a 45-minute session of painting, doing art. And you don't have to have had any training to have done it. Same thing with writing poetry. Same thing with coming up with an imaginative story. We have research out there that indicates cortisol levels are affected by creative expression and in a positive way. So that's one way that we see that creativity enhances our resilience. And another way, you know from being in our psychological resilience course, that increases in positive emotions are associated with resilience and can actually make people more resilient. And we have a lot of research also that shows us that creative work and creative activity increases positive emotions. Two important places, University of North Carolina and Barbara Fredrickson's lab, and Alice Eisen's lab at Cornell University. Dr. Eisen, unfortunately, is deceased now, but both of them did a lot of research showing that our positive emotions increase after we've done creative work. There's one of my favorite studies about this was done by Connor et al. And they did what's called a diary methodology. They had people fill out diaries on a daily basis of how much, whether they'd done creative activity or other kinds of activity during the day. They also filled out measures of positive emotions and negative emotions, and also a measure of flourishing. And what this study found was that even the day after you've engaged in creative activity, your levels of positive emotion are higher, your levels of negative emotion are lower, and you are scoring higher on the scale of flourishing. So we all want to do this. We all want to flourish, and we all want to have positive emotions. So we can get out there and do some creative activity.
Thank you for sharing some of the research on that. It really is incredible, and it's undeniable that creative expression does, have a positive correlation with, positive affect, positive emotions and greater resilience, right? To be able to handle things more ease when they come up. When you were talking about kind of the example of art and music, I was thinking, is it also creative? Do we still get the same benefits if we're listening to music or, let's say, watching art or reading poetry?
So whenever you are listening to music, that is also a creative experience because you're interpreting the music and you're putting bits of information to that music, which might include the memories you have from having heard that music before. If you have musical knowledge, you might be thinking about how the chords are harmonious or not. And so we're adding our own interpretation to art and music, and also reading. When we're reading a novel, we are in essence creating a new work of art because the way we're interpreting it and the positive, well, I shouldn't say positive, but all the pieces of information that we're adding to it in our interpretation actually make it a different thing than perhaps what the artist intended.
Yeah, that's cool. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, so reading or looking at art or watching a film or listening to music isn't a passive act. It's an active act, a creative act.
And from the way that you described it, it feels like a meaning making, experience. And it sounds like when you're referring to these interpretations, it's like we make meaning out of different things and we pull together from what we may know or consciously or unconsciously or things that we're perceiving to be happening and piecing it together and making some meaning, positive or negative, right? From the experiences. And I'm thinking now around, you mentioned, for example, like Beethoven, yes, and or some of the other great creatives, right? Michelangelo, and so on. And, I remember that, I read once, I'm not a big reader of biographies, but I did once read that a lot of the greats in history, and there's research backing that up, experience kind of an intuitive download, if you will, right? When they created the great symphonies or works of art. And I'm thinking, is it because they were in a very creative state of flow that, and, they were very present and there were positive emotions, right? They were really, engaged in what they were doing. And in that state, they were operating, if we can say, at a higher frequency or kind of with a more positive affect. And they were able to access more of that intuitive guidance. Maybe they weren't quite as distracted as they are usually during the day. How is the correlation there between receiving those quote unquote intuitive downloads and again, resilience?
Yeah, so it's really amazing, isn't it, when you hear people, especially highly creative people, talk about how the ideas just came to them. And in one of my earlier studies that I was doing on creativity and this very thing, I had a songwriter who was describing to me, I can't, unfortunately, because of anonymity restrictions, talk about who it was, but she was telling me, I said, how do you come up with your ideas for your songs? And she said, oh, I don't come up with the songs, the angels come up with the songs. And she said, on a really good night, she always said it happened at night, a really good night, I can put up my antenna and pull in one of those songs. And the angels let me do my own arrangement, but I can't change any of the lyrics and I can't change the melody. And so she was going on and on about this, like this was something that came to her from outside of herself completely. And so many highly creative people talk about this. And I bet that people who are watching or listening to us have also had an occasional experience where an idea came to you and you're like, this wasn't my idea. I didn't come up with this. I don't know where it came from, just out of the blue, right? So I think that's a very interesting phenomenon. And one of the ways that we believe that this happens is through what we call cognitive disinhibition. So that is, you are taking down barriers to work that's going on below the level of conscious awareness. And we all have this going on constantly because our brains are actually matchmaking machines. They're looking to make matches with whatever it is that we're asking them to find. So for instance, if you're walking down the street and you see somebody on the other side of the street, your brain is trying to match that person to information it already has, and it'll put together the way the person's walking, their voice, the clothes they're wearing, their facial features, and memories you have of them. And all of a sudden you'll go, oh, that's my neighbor Joe. And at a certain point, when they get close enough to you, you can put all that together. Well, that's what your brain's doing. I call this the research and development part of the brain. It's constantly seeking matches or patterns. So when you are cognitively inhibited, we naturally have a number of barriers, cognitive inhibition barriers. If we didn't have these, then our conscious awareness would be so bombarded with all the stimuli we're trying to process that we would be overwhelmed and, completely unable to operate. So consequently, we have these filters that filter out information that isn't relevant to our current goals or to our survival. We'll always be aware of loud noises or flashes of light or things like that. But some people are able to loosen the filters and let more information in to what I call the cognitive workspace from below conscious awareness. And sometimes these are fragments of ideas. Sometimes they're what Einstein called them ghosts of ideas, not a fully formed idea, just this hint of an idea. But the more you loosen these filters, the more you can access those fragments or those ghosts of patterns to form novel and original ideas. So I guess I'm getting a little off the topic of what you mentioned before, but Arthur Koestler in his book, The Act of Creation, talked about this as being able, like, think of a skin diver going down below the surface. And the surface is our conscious awareness. We go down there below to the things that are being processed below conscious awareness. Well, a skin diver in a full suit can do that, can go down there and explore all those treasures, but still connected to the surface with a lifeline. So whenever he's ready to come up, tugs on the lifeline back to conscious reality, right? And highly creative people tend to be able to do that, to get down there and see some of those treasures that are below the level of conscious awareness. And the way they do it is through loosening these filters or cognitive disinhibition. Now that allows you access to things that perhaps people who are more cognitively inhibited don't have access to. And then you can apply them to come up with solutions to your daily problems or to larger problems that you might find, or to building a novel, painting a picture, or creating a piece of music.
One of the things that I loved that you shared with us in the course, I mean, there have been so many things, so many examples, but I remember you talked about your mentor, Dr. Ellen Langer, if I remember correctly. And it was a series of questions around like how we might perceive a situation from a different lens. Would you be willing to share that with our listeners? Because I remember it was such a like an aha moment for me. And I thought, wow, and I've been doing that sometimes. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, sure. So one of the characteristics of creativity is being able to see things from multiple perspectives, right? So lots of times we get caught in our own situations and we can't get out of our own way. We begin ruminating about an issue or a problem, and we just see it from our own perspective. Well, Dr. Langer suggested, hey, let's get out of ourselves and look at our situation or our problem from another perspective. She suggested looking at it from the perspective of your hairdresser or your dentist. How would your dentist view this problem that's going on with you, or your hairdresser? Or we could even be wilder. How would a celebrity like Brad Pitt be looking at this problem of yours? Or even, how about your Cocker Spaniel? What does your dog think of this problem? How does it look from your dog's eyes? Or we might even look at it from the perspective of a Martian 30 miles up, looking down on the earth and seeing you and your problem. And what would they be thinking about it? So when we can see things from multiple perspectives, it brings so many new potential solutions into play and gets us out of a singular way of seeing things.
Thank you for sharing that. And what are some of the other characteristics of creativity and maybe some exercises or tools that go along with them?
Yeah, so one of the things that's very important about creativity is called divergent thinking. And listeners or viewers may be familiar with these ideas of divergent and convergent thinking. Convergent thinking is when you take all of your memory, everything that you've got stored, and use it to focus in toward finding the one correct solution to a problem. So if you were trying to solve a multiple choice question on your SAT or your GREs or something, then you would be looking for the one right answer, the correct answer, right? Or if you're trying to solve a mathematical proof, it's very specific. There's a specific route that you can take, a pathway you can take to get to that one right solution to the proof. But most of life's issues and problems are not that kind of problem with one right solution. If we're going to try to figure out how do we deal with new strains of viruses, or how do we come up with therapies for depression, how do we solve the climate issues that we have, these call for multiple potential solutions. And we deal with this through what's called divergent thinking. And divergent thinking is taking the contents of your memory and your skills and everything that you have and generating multiple potential solutions to a problem or prompt. That's divergent thinking. So you're radiating out all these ideas when you think divergently. And divergent thinking is so important to creativity that divergent thinking tasks are actually used as one measure of how creative you are. And one of the tasks, for instance, is called the alternate use task. And I'm sure that many of you all are familiar with this. How many uses can you come up for a brick or some other household item? How many uses can you come up with for creative uses for a shoebox, or for a pencil, or for a piece of paper, a newspaper? All of these, just look around you and see your ordinary household items, and then start thinking of alternate uses for them. And this is a really great exercise for people to do when they've got a few minutes, rather than pulling out their cell phone and starting to scroll through TikTok or Instagram. No, try to do this. Find something around you, a cup, and or anything, and an empty soup can. Try to think of all the possible uses you could for it. And that increases your ability to think divergently. If you would do that once or twice a day, then you would start thinking divergently as a matter of course. And again, divergent thinking is creative thinking.
What a great exercise. Yeah.
So another exercise that I really love, and this is fun to do if you have children or students, is called what if thinking. And the way you do this is you think of a situation in the world and change one factor about it. For instance, what if walls could actually talk? What if grass were red instead of green? You can come up with a multitude of different ideas like this, and then you just start generating all the consequences you could think of for this particular change. What if people had a third eye? What if the third eye was in the back of your head? How would life be different? What would be the consequences? What if we had an extra finger or an extra arm? All these things, when you start thinking about the consequences, again, this is sort of a type of divergent thinking. You're generating multiple answers to that question, what would be the consequences? And it's fun to do. It's fun. One of the ones that I use a lot is, what if there really was such a thing as an invisibility cloak? Wouldn't that be fun to think about, and all the consequences that we would come up with? Okay, so that's another potential exercise for people to do, and you can do it while you're walking down the street or waiting in line at the bank. Anytime you've got a couple of minutes, even driving down the street, you can do this instead of again pulling out that cell phone and scrolling, which shouldn't be doing anyway if you're driving.
It's such a great exercise. I was actually just in California this past Friday doing a training for a company on change management. And the what if question is one of the tools that we played with, in the sense of when people are resistant to change, right? Like, let's say they say, I can't do it. I don't have enough time, or this is not possible. There's too much change going on. to ask the question, right? Ignite the imagination to say, what if it was possible? Even if we don't yet exactly know how yet, what if you can do this? What if a year from now we look back on this chaotic, stressful time and we smile because we were able to, right, design, something even greater or solve this problem or flourish in some way. So it's so cool because it takes our attention off of the problem and it kind of redirects us to a potential solution. And maybe we can even get some images going in our mind, and some positive affect because we kind of tasted a little bit of what might be possible. And it's very fun to do.
It's playful, and playfulness increases our creativity. And again, we need this creativity. We're going to need it. We need it even more going forward because everything is in just the state of flux and rapid change. And we want to be able to adapt to it.
These are amazing ideas. What else you got for how to practice creativity in our busy, hectic days?
Well, one of the things, another thing that is characteristic of creative thinking is thinking metaphorically. So thinking in metaphors. And here's just one example from a creative mind. Charles Darwin had collected all of the information that he needed for his concept of natural selection. And he had all of that floating around in his mind, but he didn't know how to organize it until, in his own words, and you can actually see this in his diaries, he came up with this concept of a tree and things branching off and the branches of a tree branching off. And then he realized, okay, that we inherit things through this concept of natural selection, but it was using the metaphor of the tree that allowed him to be able to see, like, our family tree, how we branch out from each other, and these various aspects of heritability can be passed on. So that's just one example of how metaphors can be very beneficial in our creative work. And we see creative work all the time that's taking advantage of metaphors. Look at some of Shakespeare's sonnets, for example, use metaphors like this. But how can you develop your ability to think in metaphors? And one of them is just to do metaphoric exercises. So I often ask people in my workshops, are you a hammer or a nail? You have 30 minutes to think about whether you're a hammer or a nail and why you chose that answer. So people will automatically say I'm a hammer or I'm a nail. Then they have to think about, why did I choose that? And then that gives them insight into themselves when they figure out why they were a hammer or a nail. Or are you the sun or the moon? If you were an animal, what animal would you be? And these are fun metaphors to think about, but they also provide richness and insight into your own personality. And you can use them to solve other kinds of problems as well. So practicing thinking in metaphors, or just asking metaphors about yourself is another exercise that I like.
I love it. And sometimes I use this form of an exercise when helping people to tune into their inner world of how they're feeling. Because some are like, especially if I go to a training and people haven't been trained before on this, they might be like, well, I don't know how I'm feeling, or they'll give like more thinking words or more, sensation words, like I'm tired or whatever. And then, I'll say, like, just like you said, if you were an animal, what animal would you be now? If you were a color, right? Weather, right? Like so many different aspects of it. And then the answers come and they go inward and they're able to understand why, right? Why are they thinking that way? And why is it this versus something else? Or is it this and something else at the same time? Right? They're able to kind of it's almost like going to the right hemisphere where we don't really have language, but we have pictures and we have, right? They're almost like going to that, and it's really cool because I think it does create a little bit more of a whole brain state when they're able to hop from the left side to the right and back to the left, and think and see and hear and smell and taste and touch in different ways.
So, it's interesting that you talk about hopping from the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere. And it's true that in most people, the right hemisphere is specialized for visuospatial skills and the left hemisphere is specialized for language processing skills. One of the interesting things that was discovered about Einstein's brain, and Einstein's brain has this like really interesting history. It was removed from his body without permission from his family, and it was kept by the person who actually did the autopsy on him, who later then sectioned it into 240 different pieces and sent the pieces to neurologists all over the world. And this was back like in the 1960s. And so for a long time, we thought, well, we couldn't tell much from Einstein's brain because it was in all these pieces all over the world. But luckily, the person who did the autopsy did take a bunch of photographs before cutting the brain into so many pieces, and also did what's called a sagittal cut so that we could see the inside of the hemispheres, the two hemispheres. And now, thanks to this kind of voxel recording that can be done in brain imaging, we can actually look at the pieces, at those pictures of his brain and determine how large they were relative to other brains of a person of the same sex and age. And one of the things they found out about Einstein's brain was that his corpus callosum, which is the tract that connects the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere, was much larger than it was in comparison subjects. And that allows the right hemisphere and left hemisphere to be exchanging a lot of information, which is very helpful. And he talked a lot about, thought games where he was thinking in images. And that's probably one of the ways that he was able to take advantage of those images he was having, was because his hemispheres were corresponding with each other.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that before. Thank you. So how do we kind of do this for ourselves?
Well, one of the things that I think is important for us to do is to use our emotions creatively. I call this use the blues. So if you think, if you're feeling a little down, if you're feeling anxious, which so many of us have, moments of anxiety in this day and age, you can use that negative emotion as energy to create, as creative energy. And you just channel it into some sort of expressive creative work. Getting out a canvas and paints, or if you don't have canvas and paints, if you've got a piece of paper and some colored markers, anything that you can just express yourself for about 20 minutes at a time, and get that get that emotion out into a creative form. It could be writing a song. It could be writing a poem. It could be journaling. It could be, as I say, putting paints on a canvas. It could be cooking and adding spices or herbs that correspond with your mood in a way that you've never done before. So, and I have a friend who uses the blues in her garden. So she's got a blues garden that's a shade garden and has a lot of different blue colored flowers in there. But I mean, she actually used the blues to come up with this arrangement of flowers, which I thought was very creative. So yeah, use your emotions, your negative emotions as well as your positive emotions. And what happens with these negative emotions is they will begin to dissipate as you get them out into creative form. We think of all the music that's based on blues. I mean, being able to use your creative faculties to dissipate that negativity is really important. Graham Greene, for instance, the British novelist, unfortunately, he did end up succumbing to his negative emotions, but he wrote, "Sometimes I wonder how all those who do not write, compose, or paint can escape the madness, the melancholia, and the panic inherent in the human situation." So use that negativity and get it out there in some creative, expressive form. You'll feel better. It will increase your positive emotions. And it may be actually describing something in a way that will be beneficial to others who don't have your creative or talent abilities to express. So that's another thing I would recommend.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. That's an important recommendation because it gives us permission to meet ourselves where we are in the moment. So not necessarily to hop to positive thinking or, everything is perfect but just to first be with the emotions, quote unquote, positive or negative, and to allow that to move. I've heard emotions, being defined as energy in motion, right? They need to move so they don't get stuck in the body. And whether we do that in writing and drawing and singing and dancing or however, it's really important to allow that energy to be expressed. And as you said, it's such a gift to others because, we get to share our own humanity. And oftentimes when we do that, it gives permission to others to do that and be like, wow, I'm not alone. Like other people feel the way that I'm feeling. And that just brings us all even closer together. So I am so deeply grateful to you, Shelley, for the amazing research that you do, all of the courses that you teach to really make the world even more aware of how important creativity is as a life skill, as well as a way for us to experience even more personal fulfillment. And you've given us so many ideas for creative activities that we can apply right away. And for that, I'm so grateful.
Well, thank you. It's certainly been a pleasure to talk to you. I could talk for hours with you.
Thank you. How can people learn more about you, your courses, your research, your books?
Okay, well, I do have a website, shelleycarson.com. You can feel free to go there. I do teach several courses at the Harvard Extension School, so you can go to the Extension School and learn about the courses that I'm teaching. And these courses are open to anybody who wants to apply or learn more about psychopathology, habits and habit change, creativity, or psychological resilience. So I'd love to see some of your viewers or your listeners in my class, in a class of mine. And other than that, just go out there and light up the world with your own style of creativity because we're all creative.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you.